Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I am your venerable host Orochi, and today we are talking about the only thing that really matters: dragons. Specifically, it has finally happened. The dragon update has been put onto Path Builder 2, and we today shall go over all of the different types of dragons that you can make. If you are intending to play Pathfinder 2 at all, at any time, then I would say this is a must-have application, Path Builder 2. It's available on most systems. You can even get it on PC like you see here, and it is just... If you've never used it before, I believe that saying that it is mind-blowing how simple it makes character building an understatement, because I do not believe most people will know how simple character creation can be until you look at the way that Path Builder makes it, because it simplifies everything down into easy to digest little chunks, and it's so good and simple and streamlined, even for systems that are probably more crunchy than you expect it to be. So you expect going into this, there's going to be so many choices, but it's not. It lays it out in such a simple to go through manner that definitely use this, even if you are just here because you want to see what kinds of dragons are eventually coming to 5th edition, because all of this stuff will be coming out for 5th edition eventually as well. I would say pick this up and just go make a first level character of any type you want and see how simple it is to build characters for Pathfinder 2. And that might help you bridge the gap of being afraid to try out the new system and get away from 5e for a little bit, even if you just want to do a one-shot or something, because this cannot state how much I think that this is a brilliant project, brilliant application, and the only thing you can't do for free with it is do some of the optional rules that were presented in the GMG and do stats for pets. And to upgrade to the full version to get those things, it's just $5. I would say even if you don't use those things and you use this application like at all, just pay the $5. It's so good. Just do it. So we can go here, go to new character, choose any of the released classes so far. You probably want to do fighter. It's the best class, pretty much. As much as it might be a meme, having played a few games to high levels now, it is... That's a force of habit for me right there. Then go up here and default as human, because that's sadly what a lot of people play as. But you need to come up here and go to dragon. You can see that it's marked as third party and rare, so don't expect to bring this to a table and your GM to be just like, sure, that's fine, because not only is it not part of the core rules, it also has the rare tag, meaning that it's probably not going to fit into most games, because they're dragons. That first and foremost. But also, once you get into the rules of how they were done, a lot of it is maybe, well, very little actually, but some of it is sort of outside or pressing the boundaries of some of the power stuff for Pathfinder 2, which to me it doesn't go nearly far enough. So many of the things in Pathfinder 2 are just so crushing on the fantasy of being powerful characters that some things like the dragon abilities that push the boundaries a little bit, to me, are just like, they're still well within the boundaries, and the boundaries are so constraining that it's just not enough for me. I want more. So if you're a GM like I am when you play, and you're like, yeah, bring everything again. Min-max your characters, make crazy builds. I will allow everything in my games. I want players to feel powerful, to fulfill their fantasy of being the character that they want, because I can adjust my encounters, I can adjust my difficulty, and it's fairly easy in Pathfinder 2 to adjust so many different levels of difficulty with different things, and you can therefore accept a lot of different players playing a lot of different things in your games. You just have to get used to what they're doing. And that applies to 5th edition too. 5th edition has much worse rules for building encounters, so it's even harder there to present your players of varying different skills in min-maxing and all that stuff with a good challenge. So if you're one of those GMs that allow everything, this is good stuff right here. And if you're not, well, hopefully your players can convince you, because this is really fun, and it's the most best flavor you can get. So now we're dragons. And you want to go down right here to Heritage, and this is pretty much all we're going to be doing today, is just going over all of the heritages that you can choose for dragons, which is basically just the dragon type. And there's lots of them. But first, we want to go up here, get rid of all of the half-breed heritages and stuff. And these are all the dragon heritages. A lot of stuff. And first, we're going into Amber Dragons. Boom. Right there. You are an Amber Dragon, descended from a line of notorious gossips and information brokers. Amber Dragons are a member of the new Wild Dragon family. You can gossip and gather information at breakneck speeds. You gain the trained proficiency in diplomacy, or a different skill if you are already trained at diplomacy, and you gain the Hobnobber skill as a bonus skill feat. Your associated damage type is electric, a puff of piezoelectric sand. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. All this stuff at the end here is your crunch. At the beginning was all your fluff. That's generally how Paizo organizes their stuff. So what this means is you get a skill feat. All dragon heritages get a couple of perks, either skill training or a free feat, and maybe a skill feat to go along with it if you get a skill training. And then you go into the information about every dragon has a breath weapon. You do not get it for free, though. You have to spend a feat at some point to get your breath weapon. And this will tell you, first off, what kind of damage type it does, which also is the kind of damage type that you can pick up resistance for naturally. And then it also does the shape. Dragon breath weapons are either in cones, lines, or bursts. And it'll also tell you the alternate stat you can choose, because all dragons default to strength as your ancestry ability score boost. But depending upon your heritage, you can swap that out for one other boost. So you can either choose strength and get a random, or a specific one instead of strength based on your heritage. So there's a lot more thought if you want to first build out a dragon based on what kind of class or theme you want to go with, and are just looking for whatever stats to boost. It can be a little bit constraining if you choose to be a certain type of dragon first, because you're probably going to end up with strength as one of your ability scores, unless the heritage that you want just so happens to have a good secondary boost to it. Let's move on. Oh, and also, the spells are specifically for the Dragon Mage archetype, which gives you free, well, not free. You buy in spell casting like you do with any other multi-class archetype, but it's not set as a specific casting type, it's based on your dragon type, which is supremely interesting because there's nothing else like that in the game so far, that a choice of this class gives you different spells based on what another choice you have already made within your ancestry. So that's very cool. And moving on here, we have Apocalypse Dragons. You are an Apocalypse Dragon, descended from a line of despoilers and destroyers. You are resistant to the pestilent plagues that your kin unleash. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws against diseases and effects that cause the sickened condition. Each of your successful saving throws against a disease affliction reduces its stage by 2 or by 1 for a virulent disease. Each critical success against an ongoing disease reduces its stage by 3 or 2 for a virulent disease. Your associated damage type is cold, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. I think I missed that part in the first one, that you can also pick up all dragons start with Bite and Claw as their main attacks that they get natural attacks for free. You can pick up additional attacks with a feat, but only unlocking ones that your heritage automatically says it can get. So different dragons can have different attacks, like the Apocalypse Dragon can't even get a wing attack. So that's interesting, but most of the attacks are all like D4, so they're not great anyhow. But you can do different things because they have different traits that go along with them, so you might want one thing instead of something else. It might influence your choices a little bit. Moving on. Astral Dragon. You are an You are an Astral Dragon, descended from a line of proud psychic dragons from the astral plane. You gain the Astral trait. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is mental, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose intelligence instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are occult. The Draconic Resistance feat is just getting your elemental type as half your level in resistance. Something a lot of different things can get. And it's pretty common. It sort of feels to me like a lot of the things that they couldn't really think of other cool abilities to have get these feats for free, which are in the classes, the dragon classes, basically. I'm sure when the 5th edition version comes out, the Dragon Ravager and the Dragon Mage are going to be your classes. You're not going to be able to choose the regular classes because there's just too much stuff in those archetypes for them not to be classes in 5e. They just give you way too many options. And there's also another thing that happens fairly often in these, where your alternate stat boost is Constitution, which to me, unless you think that dragon type should be more tanky than others, like Constitution is the worst boost to get as free. It's the worst. Like, very few characters, I think, will ever raise Constitution above 18. Like, barbarians will want to get it to 20, maybe certain fighters, but that's probably about it. Most other classes have too many other things that give them way too many other benefits to want Constitution that high. So I feel like that's sort of a limitation to some of the dragons that get that as an option, because it's sort of not really an option, at least in my mind. Moving on, Black Dragons. You are a black dragon, descended from a line of loners with mean streaks who rule the swamps. You gain a swim speed of 10 feet and the amphibious trait. Like all creatures with the amphibious trait, you can breathe water and air. Your associated damage type is acid. Your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. It's interesting that all the dragons that are associated with water get the amphibious trait so that they can breathe water as just a free ability. Generally not useful in a lot of campaigns, but when you need it, that's spells or items that you need to pick up just to accomplish that thing, and you can do it normally. There's also the option of dragons that have the amphibious trait, they can, instead of having their movement speed be 25 and their swim speed be 10, they can swap those numbers around, and there's also a feat option later to make them equal so that they both are 25. If you're going to be in a campaign that has a lot of water, those are really good options. Another setback, I believe, for certain dragons, and it's sort of a prevailing issue of mine personally, is that lines are the least effective attacks in Pathfinder. Because not only do you not connect 2 points together to draw a line, they have a system where there's a bunch of different visualizations for it, because I do not know how to describe it, because if you're standing directly in front of somebody and you want to connect them to somebody somewhere behind them in a line, but they're not directly behind them, there's a chance that you will fail. Whereas in reality, there's no chance of that happening. If you can aim things perfectly, which you technically can in Pathfinder, you never miss with cones and arcs and that sort of thing with magic. But if you had to draw a straight line between 2 points, there's a chance you can fail at doing that in Pathfinder 2, and that rubs me the wrong way. And most breath weapons, for everybody, not just dragons, but in any way you can pick up a breath weapon at all in Pathfinder 2, it's an AoE, and most AoEs are balanced around the fact, and this sort of goes for 5e as well, most of the time in most games, AoEs are balanced around the fact that you're supposed to hit multiple targets with it. It generally comes down to being 3 or more targets starts getting you into the positive damage over what a marshal could do single target. So you want to hit at least 3 people, if not 4. And trying to do that with a line is impossible most of the time. It's very rare that you're ever going to get a line to do that. And so I personally think that lines, and the upside is supposed to be that lines are longer. They've got like twice or 3 times the range. But most of the time, how often is range ever going to be a deciding factor in how strong you want a power to be or how useful it is? Like, other than fireballs for no reason whatsoever having a 5-foot range, a 500-foot range, the range doesn't really matter. Like, if you plan on doing siege warfare like that, then yes, having a spell that you can fling farther than you can probably see on, unless you're up on a hilltop or something. In most situations, especially as adventurers, it just doesn't have any use. So to me, a line is going to be a single target attack that has a small chance of hitting additional targets. So you would want it to be more concentrated and do more damage. And I think it would be more beneficial if they hadn't gone, first off, stayed with D&D's traditional line and cones, and then added their own bursts for very specific dragon types. If they had just made it so that all dragons breathe cones, period, and then given dragons like meta magic feats to make them into lines which are more single target, higher damage abilities, and another meta magic to make them be more like hawking loogie bombs that explode, and that would be your bursts. I think that would have been a much better end result and more options for players and more options for GMs as well to choose to use powers in different ways for different situations. And that's really all it's about, is just making the things more useful. Because choosing a dragon that has a line breath weapon, you automatically know that your breath weapon is never going to be a strong piece of your arsenal, because it's rarely ever going to hit the amount of targets it needs to do enough damage to be worth the 2 actions it's going to take in a round. But as always, that's just my opinion. Next up, we have Bliss Dragons. You are a Bliss Dragon, descended from a line of serene healers. You can add the non-lethal trait to your unarmed attacks from the dragon ancestry, as well as your breath weapon from the dragon ancestry. You make this choice each time you use them, and take no penalty regardless of which you choose. Your associated damage type is electricity, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose charisma as your instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Generally, being able to choose to do non-lethal damage isn't much of a big deal. You're generally going to be fighting monsters, and they die when you drop them to 0 hit points anyway. But it's very on brand and very thematic to have a dragon that is serene healer, and you can choose to not kill people while you are tearing them apart with your claws. That is very interesting, and it would be very thematic to see a champion, like a paladin or a redeemer, Bliss Dragon, who just tears into their enemies but never kills them, no matter how ferocious they get. I like that quite a bit. Next up, we have the quintessential tyrants, Blue Dragons. You are a blue dragon, descended from a line of poised cosmopolitan manipulators who seize power through webs of conspiracy. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat, your associated damage type is electricity, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. One thing to note in this that I think most of these dragon types, like black and blue and red, they're presented in a way here that makes them more neutral. As player options, you can't just say, oh, well, you got to start as evil, because that's not how player options go. So I find it very interesting that all of these evil dragons are presented in a way that really shaves off like the core like aspects of their evilness and sort of turns it more into, hey, they have tendencies to do these, you know, be manipulative or be, you know, grouchy loners or bullies, and they sort of, it's still negative, but not, you know, the overpowering evil that you've come to know from a lot of these different dragons. I think I like that approach because it kind of shows for newer players who might not their imagination hasn't grown to the point where they can just automatically think outside the box far enough to take, you know, like black dragons are some of the most evil, vile dragons there are, and to take like the preconceived notions they have of black dragons and pull it into a more neutral or maybe even like reluctantly good kind of space, and to flesh a character out with that in mind, it would be hard for some people to be able to cross that distance and not break what they think a certain dragon type is, which I like. It's good to not have things just be one-sided or have only one facet to like what they are, to just say that all dragons of this type are always this way. That's why we have so many problems when making different races PC options, because then you're just like, oh, well, that means that has to be an analogy for these real people and that kind of stuff. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't really need to be anything like that. It's just bad design to make things that are just single-faceted, shallow representations of things. That's all it is. So this gives a little bit more depth to the kind of things that you can do with these options. Next up, we have the good old brass dragons. You are a brass dragon descended from a line of independent conversationalists with insatiable curiosity and short attention spans. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is fire, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks is wing. Just the one. You can choose Charisma instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. I sort of wish that this book had the space, because Mark has already gone on record saying this book is like 5 times bigger than anything he ever thought he could ever make. And yet a lot of these dragons, especially for people like me who are new to Pathfinder for 2nd edition, I want to know more about all these different types of dragons. How do they differentiate from 5e dragons? How are dragons on Galarian different? What is their personalities are different? What abilities they have different? Everything about them, I want to know what all the differences are between Galarian and Taural dragons, since they share a very, very strong connection, even though both have kind of gone in different ways, because things have changed for 4th and 5th edition. So they did diverge, and they are different in maybe very slight ways for some of them, because, as everybody knows, the core metallic dragons, brass, bronze, and copper, have always sort of blended together for a lot of people. And it's hard to really separate that for a lot of us who've been with the systems for a while. Next up, we have Brine Dragons. You are a Brine Dragon, descended from a line of water elemental dragons obsessed with rigid courtesy and discipline. You gain the elemental and water traits. You still need to breathe, but you also gain the amphibious trait, allowing you to breathe both water and air. You gain a swim speed of 10 feet, but you can choose to instead gain a swim speed of 25 feet and reduce your land speed to 10 feet. Your associated damage type is acid, your breath is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are primal. Like I had mentioned before, a lot of dragons who are amphibious and very water-based have this option to swap around their speeds, which is very interesting. It's nice to have more options for doing things and to specialize a little bit. And moving on to Bronze Dragons. You are a Bronze Dragon, descended from a line of stoic scholars and guardians of lore. You gain a swim speed of 10 feet and the amphibious trait. Like all creatures with the amphibious trait, you can breathe both air and water. Your associated damage type is electricity. Your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose intelligence instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. You also get a little bit more flavor with these dragons when you start picking up some of their very specific ancestry and even class-based feats, because both the Dragon Ravager and the Dragon Mage have a splattering of heritage-based feats, which is very, very cool. Next is Cerulean Dragon. You are a Cerulean Dragon, descended from a line of explorers and adventurers. Cerulean Dragons are a member of the new Wild Dragon family. You gain a swim speed of 10 feet and the amphibious trait. Like all creatures with an amphibious trait, you can breathe both air and water. Your associated damage type is bludgeoning, a wave of water. And your dragon abilities that deal bludgeoning damage have the water trait. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose dexterity instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. This is the first dragon we get to see for the new Wild Dragon types, which it is so interesting that despite the fact that they already had tons of different types of dragons, that they were going to go, hey, let's make an entire new family of dragons besides chromatic, metallic, elemental, and all the outsider type dragons. Now we have wild dragons as well. Next up, Cloud Dragons. You are a Cloud Dragon descended from a line of inquisitive air elemental dragons who love to wander and explore. You gain the air and elemental traits, though you still need to breathe. Many elementals don't, that is why that is there. Fog and mist don't impair your vision. You ignore the concealed condition from fog and mist. Your associated damage type is electricity, and your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are primal. It's nice to think of being able to see through fog and mist as being clouds. When you're flying through the sky, you can hide in clouds and you can watch as your prey or your pursuers try to come after you, and you can either lose them or ambush them. Otherwise, I do not think that ability has a whole lot of uses in general, unless you're specifically going to pick up spells, which there aren't really many, that give you cloud cover and misty concealment. Next up, Copper Dragons. You are a Copper Dragon descended from a line of wily pranksters and compassionate hedonists. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is Acid. Your breath is a line, and your additional unarmed attack is Tail. You can choose Charisma instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are Arcane. It's sort of unfortunate that Copper and Brass Dragons sort of have a very similar outgoing sort of personality, but they're starkly different because one just likes to talk a lot and the others like to engage in lots of foolery of lots of different types. Now on to more things that might be new for a lot of people. Crypt Dragons. You are a Crypt Dragon descended from a line of Soul Wardens. Your weapon and unarmed attacks against incorporeal creatures become magical, and if they were already magical, they can instead gain the effects of the Ghost Touch property rune. Your associated damage type is negative. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are Horn and Tail. You can choose Wisdom instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are Divine. Yet, more abilities that are super specific to the types of campaign you would want to be in, or it's like, if you know you're going to be fighting a lot of undead, then this is a great choice, because once you start getting into shadows and ghosts and all those things that can really screw party members up, you're already good at that. That's kind of your job. And on to Crystal Dragons. You are a Crystal Dragon descended from a line of vain but good-hearted Earth Elemental Dragons who love to cultivate beautiful homes. You gain the Earth and Elemental traits, though you still need to breathe, and you gain a special sense, imprecise tremor sense with a range of 20 feet. This means you can use your tremor sense to attempt to determine the square of a creature in contact with the same exact surface. In addition, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to perception checks whenever you're trying to locate an undetected creature that is within your range of your tremor sense. Your associated damage type is Piercing, a spray of piercing crystals. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attack is Tail. You can choose Charisma instead of Strength as your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are Primal. It's nice to see many of the gem dragons returning, because they haven't been in D&D for a little while, and I'm not sure how prevalent they were in first edition of Pathfinder, but I've always liked gem dragons, even if they were a bit odd. And speaking of a little odd, Dream Dragons. You are a Dream Dragon descended from a line of Masters and Guardians of the Dreamlands. You gain the Dream trait. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus on saving throws against spells and abilities that specifically affect your dreams, such as Nightmare. And if you roll a success on a saving throw against such a spell or ability, you gain a critical success instead. If you roll a critical success on your saving throw against such an spell or ability, you gain a vague sense of the identity and location of the entity that attempted to intrude upon your dreams. Your associated damage type is mental, your breath shape is cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose charisma instead of your strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are occult. I'm not sure if you could ever really have a specific sort of campaign where this type of dragon would shine, but it does have a lot of flavor to it and lends towards doing certain things, specifically things that have to do with, like, for old editions of D&D, Ravenloft and the Shadow Planes were all things that were connected and sort of in dreams, but also a real place you could go to. And if you try to, mix that sort of stuff in nowadays, I think these and their counterparts, which we will get to in a bit, are very interesting, could have a lot of mix with that sort of a theme. Next up, Edict Dragons. Yes. Could not find a picture of an Edict Dragon, unfortunately. But as you can tell from the description that's coming here, they do have a bit of interest in their capabilities. You are an Edict Dragon descended from a line of planners, bringers of order, and purgers of corruption. While your tale isn't prehensile, it is capable of writing simple text and glyphs, and it generates the necessary ink on its own. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus on saving throws against fear effects, and if you roll a success against a fear effect, you get a critical success instead. Your associated damage type is slashing, your breath shape is a line of razor-sharp papers and parchments, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Just from that, you can imagine a very strange combination of a lawyer dragon or a librarian dragon, and that alone can conjure up a lot of different images. But sadly, we do not know what their coloring is, because I do not know if these were really done in first edition Pathfinder or not. Next up, Etheric Dragons. You are an Etheric Dragon descended from a line of pragmatic survivalists from the ethereal plane. You gain the ethereal trait. Your weapon and unarmed attacks against incorporeal creatures become magical, and if they were already magical, they instead gain the effects of the Ghost Touch property rune. Your associated damage type is force, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You could choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are occult. Yet another dragon that is good against incorporeal undead. A very useful thing to have in certain adventures, say like Abomination Bolts. Next up, we have Forest Dragons, which are Imperial Dragons. You are a forest dragon descended from a line of jealous guardians of nature who loathe technology and civilization. You gain the plant trait. You are much harder to track in forest terrain. While in such terrain, you gain the benefits of Pass Without Trace spell at all times, using your spell DC or class DC, whichever is higher, to determine the DC to track you. Your associated damage type is piercing, a swarm of biting insects. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are primal. And on to the goody goodies of all goody dragons. Gold. That was weird. You are a gold dragon, descended from a line of wise and powerful counselors and leaders. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is fire. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Most people from both D&D and Pathfinder know what they are, so we shall continue. Same here, pretty much, though. Green Dragons. You're a green dragon descended from a line of obsessive and meticulous scholars. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is poison. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose intelligence instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. Here you can see the difference between the typical D&D sort of green dragons that tend to be corruptors and manipulators, and instead they're just obsessive, maybe even if you wanted, obsessive compulsive and meticulous scholars. They could be the sort who maybe get violent if you try to take a book out with dirty hands, or maybe they hunt you down and kill you if you don't return a book on time. Those could be green dragon aspects. Moving on, we have yet another wild dragon, and I believe this is the correct picture for them. You are a Harlequin Dragon, descended from a line of clever, insightful jesters. Harlequin Dragons are a member of the new Wild Dragon family. Your jokes and performances contain insights that impress people the more they realize your hidden depths. You gain the trained proficiency in performance, and if you are already trained in performance, you can get a different skill instead. You gain the impressive performance skill feat as a bonus skill feat. Your associated damage type is poison, a cloud of poisonous gas. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose charisma instead of your strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. It seems a lot of the new wild dragons are of the happy-go-lucky sort, which I'm unsure if that was supposed to be a through line for them all or not. And a favorite for a lot of people who have perhaps played Wrath of the Righteous, Havoc Dragon. You are a Havoc Dragon, descended from a line of passionate artists who always give it their all, but wind up causing trouble. You gain the trained proficiency rank in performance, or in another skill if you are already trained in performance, and you gain the virtuosic performer skill feat. Your associated damage type is sonic, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Indigo Dragon. You are an Indigo Dragon, descended from a line of party-going revelers. Indigo Dragons are a member of the new Wild Dragon family. Your antics can quickly make a positive impression on large groups of people. You gain the trained proficiency in diplomacy, or in a different skill if you are already trained in diplomacy, and you gain the group impression skill as a bonus skill feat. Your associated damage type is piercing, a cone of thorns and indigo flowers. Your breath shape is a cone. Your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. Inferno Dragons. You are an Inferno Dragon descended from a line of tyrannical deal brokers. You keep your deeds out of the spotlight of magical effects meant to learn more about you. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws against divination effects, and if you roll a success against a divination, you get a critical success instead. Your associated damage type is fire, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Devil Dragons. They want to make you an offer you can't refuse. Lunar Dragons. You are a Lunar Dragon descended from a line of nosy interplanetary people watchers. You inherently reflect light, making it easier to avoid being dazzled or blinded. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws against effects that would dazzle or blind you, and if you roll a success on a saving throw against such an effect, you get a critical success instead. Your associated damage type is cold, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. You can pick up on these dragons from the specific abilities that they can get, and that they are people watchers from the moon, that they're sort of like, what is it, Marvel's Watchers, or where they just sit on the moon watching mortals go about their day, doing their things. And they're snoops that just like watching other people. It's perhaps somewhere between strange and stalkerish when one of such dragons decides to go against their nature and go down and interact with all the people that they watch. But I'm sure people can come up with lots of interesting stories that you can devise from that. Next up, Magma Dragon. You are a Magma Dragon descended from a line of brash, unpredictable, and violent fire elemental dragons. You gain the elemental and fire traits, though you still need to breathe. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. While your associated damage type is fire, if you gain a breath weapon, it deals half fire damage and half bludgeoning damage as you breathe molten magma. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are primal. Here we go. The antithesis of Dream Dragons. We now make our way to Nightmare Dragon. You are a Nightmare Dragon, descended from a line of artists of terror from the Dreamlands. You gain the Dream trait. You are trained in Intimidation, or another skill of your choice if you would already be trained in Intimidation, and gain a +1 circumstance bonus on your checks to demoralize or coerce, or a +2 circumstance bonus if you know the specifics of a creature's nightmare, such as from the Dream Sight feat. If you're a master intimidation, this increases to a +2 bonus or a +3 bonus if you know the specifics of a creature's nightmare. Your associated damage type is mental, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose constitution instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are occult. It is interesting the way that they make them so that they're artists. Their canvas are dreams, and they are all about making terrible, frightening things with their artistic flair. And taken out of the dreamlands and into reality, imagine what sort of things they would do. Next up is Occult Dragon. You are an Occult Dragon, or Thaumaturge Dragon, descended from a line of eclectic seekers who delve into the secrets of esoteric objects and live most of their lives in a humanoid disguise. You gain the Change Shape feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is your choice of cold or fire. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are occult. If given a choice, I believe it is usually more beneficial to choose cold instead of fire, just on basis that there are more fire resistant and immune creatures than cold. Next up, Paradise Dragons. You are a Paradise Dragon, descended from a line of defenders and champions of righteousness. You are resolute against poisons and petrification. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus on saving throws against poison or petrification. Each of your successful saving throws against a poison affliction reduces its stage by 2 or by 1 for virulent poison. Each critical success against an ongoing poison reduces its stage by 3 or 2 for virulent poison. Your associated damage type is force, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Onto the big bad boys that everyone knows, the quintessential evil dragon. You are a red dragon, descended from a line of proud and arrogant dragons who take control by force of might. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is fire. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose Charisma instead of Strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. Nothing really new there. Brutes and bullies. Rift Dragons. You are a Rift Dragon, descended from a line of rampagers who love to break things. Once you've begun a rampage, it's hard to stop you. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws against effects that would cause the slowed or stunned condition on a failure. If you roll a success on a saving throw against such an effect, you get a critical success instead. These benefits don't apply against effects that only cause the slowed or stunned condition on a critical failure and not a regular failure, or only cause the slowed or stunned condition on a success and would apply a worse condition on a failure. Your associated damage type is acid. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. It's the Juggernaut Dragon. Sea Dragons. You are a sea dragon, descended from a line of kindly but fickle masters of weather and precipitation. You gain a swim speed of 10 feet in the amphibious and water traits. You can also choose to gain a swim speed of 25 feet and reduce your land speed to 10 feet. Like all creatures with the amphibious trait, you can breathe both water and air. Your associated damage type is bludgeoning, a ball of water, and your Dragon abilities that deal bludgeoning damage have the water trait. Your breath shape is a burst, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose dexterity instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. It is interesting to note that sea dragons tend to be lazy in that they are often seen by smaller cultures as elemental sea gods, and they tend to milk that sort of thing. I liked that information quite a bit. Now on to one of the ultimate justice dragons. You are a silver dragon descended from a line of chivalrous champions of justice, guardians and guides of goodly societies. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is cold. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost. Your spells are divine. Most people know what silver dragons are. You are a sky dragon descended from a line of religious traditionalists who offer advice and aid to those who seek out their remote homes. Fog and mist don't impair your vision. You ignore the concealed condition from fog and mist. Your associated damage type is electricity. Your breath shape is a burst. And your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose wisdom instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. They're hermit dragons who live on top of mountains and expect you to go and seek them out for information. You are a solar dragon, descended from a line of the most arrogant dragons in existence, who created all life, according to your heritage's own telling. You are constantly glowing with light, with the effects of the light spell. You can spend a single action which has the concentration trait to stop the glow or start it again. You also gain light as an innate arcane cantrip. Your associated damage type is fire, your breath shape is a line, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and horn. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. It is interesting the kinds of characters you might build with the mindset that you are the sun, the beginning of all life in the universe. Imagine, even against the arrogance of red dragons, solar dragons believe that they are the origin of all things. Be interesting to see how a debate between a solar dragon and a red dragon would go. But of course, it would end up in a fight that sadly most solar dragons would lose. You are a sovereign dragon, descended from a line of subtle manipulators, negotiators, and kingmakers. You gain the Earth trait. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is mental, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost. Your spells are occult. Sovereign dragons are another type of the Asian imperial dragons, and it is interesting to note that they have thin scales, which is why they are the only natural type of dragons to wear armor. You are a time dragon descended from a line of patient watchers and guardians of history. While most eternal dragons already live for millennia before dying of old age, you are timeless and only die due to virulence, illness, or other dangers. Your knowledge of time and the dimension in which it flows is unsurpassed. You gain the additional lore feat for Dimension of Time lore. Your associated damage type is electricity, your breath shape is cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose dexterity instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. It mentions eternal dragons because that is a very specific thing in this book of why you are allowed to play dragons, because it presumes that a normal dragon would do the eternal ritual and it rearranges the way that magic flows through your body so that you become weaker but then gain power quickly, aka you become a player character. And you level up by gaining experience and are subject to the limitations that players are, like you can't fly at low levels, you can't, your abilities are level gated and that sort of thing. We will get more into that later. And now we have a unique among unique dragons, specifically because as much as the wild dragons were created specifically for this book, this dragon is a custom built dragon by a very popular follower of D&D and Critical Role named Ginny D. Battlezoo reached out to her and gave her the opportunity to create a dragon of her own design, and she made the Toadstool Dragon. This is not a picture of that because I could not find one, and I will put all the relevant information in the doobly-doo down below for credit for this. But it's sort of similar because it does indeed have toadstools growing off it, which the Toadstool Dragon does. You are a Toadstool Dragon, descended from a line of communal gourmands who live in large colonies. Toadstool Dragons are a member of the new Leshy Dragon family, and their corresponding Leshy is Fungus Leshy. You gain the Fungus trait. You can constantly grow with bioluminescent fungi, with the effects of the light spell. You can spend a single action, which has the Concentrate trait, to stop the glow and start it again. You also gain the Seasoned Skill feat. Your associated damage type is Poison, a cloud of spores. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are Tail and Horn. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are Primal. Once we get into some of the specific feats that this dragon can get, it's very interesting because unlike a lot of dragons, they live in large communities and they can eat anything. Even stuff that is poisonous or rotten, and indeed they sort of prefer rotten food to most other things. But they are also skilled enough to be able to determine the difference in the things they eat to determine what most normal people would like versus what they themselves would prefer. So that makes them great cooks and gourmands because they have a very refined taste. I think this is when you think about toadstools and being a fungus and all that sort of stuff, you don't probably innately think of great cooking and having a great sense of taste and all that stuff. So I think this is an amazingly interesting design, and I hope to see somebody making use out of it sometime. You are a Tumult Dragon, descended from a line of capricious seekers of change. Unlike most dragons, you can change your associated damage type. Your associated damage type is your choice of acid, cone, cold, electricity, fire, or sonic, and you can spend a month of downtime retraining to change between them, alternating all other facets of your character depending on your associated damage type accordingly, which just means your resistance and that sort of stuff. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat, your breath shape as a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are divine. Basically Chaos Dragons. Only less of the random chaos kind of stuff that a lot of people think of when they think of chaos. Umbral Dragon. You are an Umbral Dragon, descended from a line of malicious hunters of the undead from the Shadow Plane. You gain the Shadow trait. Your weapon and unarmed attacks against incorporeal creatures becomes magical, and if they were magical already, they instead gain the effects of the Ghost Touch rune. Your associated damage type is negative, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose Wisdom instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are primal. At this point, you could make an entire party of dragons that were good against incorporeal undead almost. You are an underworld dragon descended from a line of natural alchemists and hoarders. You gain the fire trait. Smoke doesn't impair your vision. You ignore the concealed condition from smoke. Your associated damage type is fire, your breath shape is a burst, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose intelligence instead of strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. This is the last of the Asian-inspired dragons, who do in fact have a little bit of their own feat lines, because even compared to regular dragons that are capable of getting like attack of opportunity and stuff, all the Imperial dragons have their own version of that, and even additional upgrades to it that they can get, which is very interesting. You are a Vermilion Dragon, descended from a line of thrill seekers who love to tell tall tales. Vermilion Dragons are a member of the new Wild Dragon family. Even when people point out contradictions in your tall tales, you just roll with it and keep on spinning confabulations. You gain the trained proficiency in deception, or in a different skill if you were already trained in deception, and you gain the confabulator skill feat as a bonus skill feat. Your associated damage type is fire, an ignited sneeze of flammable spices. Your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and tail. You can choose charisma instead of strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. I find it very interesting that all of the wild dragons have socially based inclinations. It's very interesting to be called wild. You are a void dragon, descended from a line of corrupted destroyers. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is negative, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are tail and wing. You can choose Charisma instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. You are a vortex dragon, descended from a line of interplanetary messengers, but you are determined to forge your own path, rather than being bound to deliver messages across worlds for strange entities. Your starting speed is 30 instead of 25. Additionally, if you gain the Star Flight feat, flight through space takes you half as long as other outer dragons. Your associated damage type is fire, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attacks are horn and wing. You can choose dexterity instead of strength for your first ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. And yes, you heard that right. Outer dragons can fly through space, and vortex dragons happen to be very fast at it. So you could make an entire group of PCs that travel different planets. You could pretend you're playing Starfinder, but with dragons. And last, and perhaps one of the least, we have white dragons. Who really is going to play as a white dragon? Sadly, I don't think very many. You are a white dragon descended from a line of brutish and predatory survivalists. You gain the Draconic Resistance feat as a bonus feat. Your associated damage type is cold, your breath shape is a cone, and your additional unarmed attack is tail. You can choose Constitution instead of Strength for your first Ancestry ability boost, and your spells are arcane. And there we have it. That is all of the ancestry, the heritages for the dragon ancestry. There's so much good stuff to go over in here, and we will be hitting a lot more points once we get into choosing ancestry feats and then into Ravager and Mage. But all of those will be for another video. So for now, enjoy.